Elena was only 21 when she first met Daniel, a moment that felt like fate wrapped in starlight. She was a quiet, dreamy girl who carried poetry in her eyes and longed for a love that would make her feel alive. Daniel appeared in her life like a storm she didn't see coming, older, confident, and magnetic, the kind of man who drew attention without even trying. The first time he looked at her, it was as if the crowded room disappeared, as though his gaze could cut through the noise of the world and claim her as his own. He spoke with charm, showered her with compliments, and made her believe she was the most extraordinary woman alive. For a girl who often doubted herself, it was intoxicating to be seen that way. Soon, their days were filled with flowers delivered to her doorstep, surprise visits that made her heart flutter, and endless drives under the stars where Daniel whispered promises of forever. He told her she was his world, his reason for breathing, and she believed every word because she wanted to. Her friends cautioned her, uneasy about the intensity in his eyes and the way he always had to know where she was, but Elena dismissed their worries. She told herself it was passion, proof that he cared, that he loved her with a devotion most women only dreamed of. For a while, it felt like living inside a fairy tale, like she had stumbled into the kind of love stories written in novels. What Elena didn't know was that sometimes the brightest flames burn not to warm you, but to consume you whole, and the very love that felt like salvation would soon become her prison. Friends, if this story touches your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more heartfelt tales. At first, Elena brushed away the small signs that something in Daniel's love was not quite right. He started with little questions that seemed harmless, questions any caring partner might ask: where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you pick up my call? She thought it was sweet that he worried so much, that he wanted to know every detail of her day. But soon, those questions began to feel less like concern and more like interrogation. Every missed call became an argument, every delay in replying a reason for suspicion. If she laughed at a joke from a colleague, Daniel's smile would stiffen. If she wore a dress he thought was too much, he would suggest she change, claiming he wanted to protect her from unwanted eyes. And slowly, without realizing it, Elena began shrinking her world to fit inside the boundaries of his approval. Her friends noticed first. Invitations to late-night hangouts grew fewer, then stopped altogether because Daniel didn't like her wandering out after work. Phone calls became awkward because if he walked into the room, she had to hang up quickly to avoid the storm in his eyes. At work, she felt his presence outside in the parking lot, sitting in his car, watching, as though making sure she stayed faithful. What once felt like romance was now a constant reminder that she was being monitored. Daniel cloaked it all in the language of love. He said he was only being protective, that he couldn't stand the thought of losing her. And Elena, wanting so badly to keep the peace, told herself it was a small price to pay. The breaking moment in this downward spiral came one night at a family gathering. The room was filled with laughter, children running around, relatives sharing stories over food. Elena's cousin, someone she had grown up with, hugged her warmly after years of not meeting. She felt nothing but affection, the kind that belonged to family, but when she turned her head, she saw Daniel's eyes, dark and sharp, locked on her with a quiet rage that chilled her. Later that night, when they were alone, he accused her of disrespecting him, of flirting with her own cousin. His words were laced with venom, his grip on her wrist tight enough to leave marks, and though he didn't raise his voice, the cold fury in his tone was more terrifying than shouting could ever be. In that moment, Elena understood the truth she had been trying so hard to ignore. Daniel's love was no longer love at all. It was a cage, and every compromise she made only built the bars higher. What she once believed was passion had turned into control, and control, she now saw, was just another name for possession. The winter morning was quiet, the kind of stillness where even the sound of one's own breath feels too loud. Elena stood by the window of her small living room, a cup of tea trembling in her hands as she watched the children outside building snowmen, their laughter ringing through the air like music. For a moment, her heart ached with a longing so deep it nearly broke her. She remembered a time when she laughed as freely, when she believed life could be joyful and love could be gentle. But that girl felt like a ghost now, someone she could barely recognize in the mirror. All that remained was a shadow of herself, tired, fragile, and suffocated under the weight of Daniel's obsession. And as she stood there, tears streaming silently down her face, she realized something with absolute clarity: if she stayed, she would lose herself completely. That day was her breaking point. It wasn't one dramatic fight or one unbearable act, it was the slow accumulation of pain, the quiet realization that love was never meant to feel like fear. Daniel's constant monitoring, his accusations, his grip that left bruises not just on her wrist but on her spirit, these were not acts of devotion. They were shackles. Elena began to understand that the longer she stayed, the more invisible she would become, until one day she would look in the mirror and see nothing at all. With trembling resolve, she began to plan her escape. It was not an easy choice, fear clawed at her with every thought. What if he found out? What if he followed through on his threats? Daniel had often said, in his darkest moments, that he could not live without her, that if she left, he would take her with him into destruction. His words haunted her, but her spirit whispered that freedom was worth the risk. Quietly, she started saving money, stashing small amounts of cash in the lining of an old purse. She hid a few clothes with her neighbor, a kind woman who noticed Elena's pale face and offered silent support without asking questions. Late at night, she reconnected with her childhood best friend, who promised to help her when the time came. Each step felt like walking across a thin sheet of glass, fragile and dangerous, but each step also reignited a flicker of hope in her chest. Still, Daniel's eyes grew sharper. He seemed to sense the shift in her, the faint spark of independence she tried to conceal. His apologies became more desperate, his embraces tighter, his threats sharper. Elena lived in a constant state of tension, balancing her secret plans with the fear that he would discover them at any moment. But she knew now, deep in her bones, that there was no turning back. For the first time in years, she had tasted the idea of freedom, and it gave her strength. The cage was breaking, and though fear surrounded her, so did a new and fragile hope. The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that presses against the skin and makes the heart beat louder than footsteps. The moon hung low, casting pale silver light across the empty street, and Elena felt its glow through the curtains as she sat at the edge of her bed, her mind heavy with dread. She had been careful, so careful, to hide her plans, to move quietly, to smile just enough to keep Daniel's suspicions at bay. But despite her efforts, she knew he sensed something shifting inside her. The distance in her eyes, the way her voice carried hesitation, the faint strength that had begun to replace her fear, he noticed it all. And tonight, it erupted. Daniel entered the room slowly, his presence chilling the air before he even spoke. His face was calm, almost too calm, but his eyes burned with a fury Elena had learned to recognize, the storm before it broke. He sat across from her, leaning forward, his voice low and trembling, as though holding back an ocean of anger. "You think I don't see it?" he whispered. "You're slipping away from me. You're planning something. Don't lie." His words pierced her, and though she tried to stay composed, her silence only confirmed what he already believed. Then came the words that froze her blood. "You're mine, Elena. You've always been mine. And if you ever try to leave me, I won't let you go alone. I'd rather destroy us both than live without you." His tone carried no hesitation, no doubt, only a chilling certainty that left her trembling. For a moment, the room itself felt like a cage, the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating. Elena's breath quickened as she realized the depth of his obsession. This wasn't just jealousy, it was madness. In his mind, love had twisted into possession, devotion into control, desire into something dangerous enough to kill. He gripped her shoulders tightly, not violently, but firmly enough that she felt the weight of his desperation. The look in his eyes was not that of a man in love, but of someone clinging to ownership, unwilling to let go no matter the cost. Elena sat frozen, her body rigid, her soul screaming for escape. And in that terrifying moment, she understood a truth that made her heart pound with both fear and courage. Staying meant death of another kind, the slow suffocation of her spirit, the erasure of her soul. Leaving meant risk, perhaps even danger, but it also meant a chance at life. The line had been drawn. There would be no middle ground anymore. The storm had broken, and the only way to survive was to face it head-on, even if it meant running through the fire. The morning of her escape was drenched in silence, the kind of silence that hums with both fear and possibility. Elena woke before dawn, her heart beating like a war drum in her chest, her body trembling as if it already knew the danger that hovered over her decision. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, each detail mapped out with the precision of someone walking through fire. Daniel had left early for work, his car engine fading into the distance, and for the first time in years, she felt the walls around her loosen. The cage was open, if only she had the courage to step outside. Her hands shook as she pulled the hidden bags from the back of her closet, the ones she had been packing slowly over weeks, each item a quiet rebellion against his control. A scarf, a photograph, a few changes of clothes, simple things, yet each one a fragment of her identity that she was determined to carry with her. She moved quickly, yet every creak of the floorboards made her flinch, as though Daniel might appear at the door at any second. When she finally walked out into the cold air, the breath she released was shaky, but it carried with it years of pent-up fear. Her best friend waited at the corner in a car, eyes wide with urgency. Elena climbed in, her chest tightening as they drove away from the house that had once been a dream and later became her prison. She couldn't bring herself to look back. Every mile that stretched between her and Daniel felt both terrifying and liberating, as though she was outrunning the shadow of a storm. For the first time in years, she was moving not to please him, not to survive another day under his rules, but to live, for herself. The first weeks in the new city were hard. Silence felt strange, and freedom almost unbearable. Elena jumped at every knock, flinched at passing footsteps, convinced he would find her. Sleep came only in fragments, filled with dreams of his angry voice. But slowly, as the days unfolded, something fragile began to grow within her. She got a small job at a bookstore, surrounded by words that reminded her of the girl who once dreamed freely. She walked through the park without explaining herself to anyone, felt the sun on her face without permission, and laughed with her friend late into the night without guilt. Every moment of freedom was both foreign and healing, teaching her that love should never feel like fear. Months passed, and the scars of her past remained, but they no longer defined her. They became reminders of her strength, proof that even in the darkest prisons, the spirit can find a way to break free. Elena had learned the hardest truth, that real love never cages, never suffocates, never demands ownership. Real love sets you free, and anything less is not love at all. So dear listener, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support allows us to continue telling stories of survival, hope, and the quiet courage it takes to reclaim one's life. Speech Balloon Special Request. Comment below if you believe that love should always feel safe, kind, and freeing, because your words might give someone trapped in silence the courage they need to step into the light.